All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'd like to invite our hosts to turn on their video and audio, and also our moderator. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this live stream presentation, Introduction to the Sunrise Movement of Northern New Mexico. I'm Elizabeth Frost, a volunteer with PEEC's Young Adult Advisory Group. PEEC, or Pajarito Educational Environmental Education Center, is a nonprofit that runs in Los Alamos Nature Center, located in Los Alamos, New Mexico. I'll be the moderator for today's talk. Joining me as a co-moderator is Krista Tyson, PEEC's Visitor Services Manager and Volunteer Coordinator. Los Alamos Nature Center is currently closed. We have a lot of ways you can interact with and connect with nature. Check the PEEC website, peaknature.org, for a list of more live stream presentations like this one. We'll send you an evaluation form after the talk, and we'll use your comments to improve future programs. We're able to offer programming at this time because we're wonderful members and donors. So I'd like to send a special shout out to you for your generous support. The program this evening is brought to you by PEEC's Young Adult Advisory Group. Young Adult Advisory Group is a PEEC volunteer group that works to connect young adults with PEEC, advise staff on how to support young adults, and develop programs for young adults ages 16 to 25. The YAG group also works to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into PEEC's programs and exhibits, and connects young adults with nature. If you're interested in learning more about our YAG group, Crystal will be putting her email in the chat, and you can email her directly. Today, we have the privilege of having two presenters with us from the Sunrise Movement, Zoe Hemez and Miriam Wallstrom. Zoe Hemez grew up in Los Alamos and graduated from Los Alamos High School in 2018. She has been a longtime civil climate activist in New Mexico and other areas of the United States. She currently attends Western Washington University, where she is studying mathematics and energy sciences. Miriam Wallstrom was born and raised in Los Alamos and now studies political science at Stanford University. She is interested in studying how the climate crisis can be migrated through social actions and legislative means. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Can everybody see my screen okay?
I can.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're super excited to give an introduction to Sunrise National, as well as the local hub, Sunrise of Northern New Mexico. So with that, I'll let Zoe take it away.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Krista and Elizabeth and Miriam. So just before we get started, I just want to take a moment to remind everybody that we are occupying stolen land right now. For those of you in Los Alamos, that's usually Pueblo land, Tewa people's land. Personally, I am in Washington State right now, so that's Coast Salish land. And we just really like to start our presentations and our conversations this way, because when we have these conversations about the future, we really want to center Indigenous voices and prioritize their needs. Indigenous people have historically been the best stewards of this land, and we need to look towards kind of giving back leadership and control to them instead of, prioritizing our needs. And now that we've situated ourselves physically, we also want to take a moment to look at where we are here in time. We are facing a really massive crisis right now, both in climate change and in the pandemic. Obviously, we're in a national pandemic. I don't have to tell everybody that. Okay, sorry, the slide changed. Already we've seen over 350,000 Americans die from the disease, and still cases are rising and hospitals are flooded, and essential workers are just working day in and day out to treat these patients. Like I said, the pandemic is really also exposing a lot of the weaknesses in the US health system. A lot of folks can't get the care that they need simply because they don't have enough money to pay for insurance or treatment. Again, hospitals are completely flooded, even treating patients in hallways and makeshift beds in parking lots. And they're really also struggling to get all the equipment they need to treat all these patients. And many of us have probably also been affected in some way by the massive downturn in the economy. Personally, I know I lost my job. Unemployment is at a record high and it's only rising. And that's really disproportionately also affecting essential workers and communities of color that were already struggling to get by before the pandemic. And meanwhile, the climate crisis is still very much active and getting worse and worse. Even earlier this year, we saw massive fires in Australia. This summer, record fires in California and the West Coast. And we continue to see huge storms in the East Coast and record temperatures across the world. And just to emphasize again, both the pandemic and climate change are really disproportionately affecting essential workers, poor communities, and communities of color.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zoe. I know that's a lot to kind of take in, even though we're living with it every day, but just to kind of see the crisis that we're in spelled out like that is pretty intense. So as we think about this moment that we're in and the crisis that we're in, it is sometimes helpful to look back at historical examples, to think about when we've been in moments like this before and look to see what the leadership did at that time. And one somewhat good comparison is the Great Depression. So during the Great Depression, there was huge economic downturn, and it's hard to describe the sheer desperation of this period. Unemployment was at a record high, and people were desperate, standing for hours in food lines, and thousands found themselves homeless. But luckily, because there was a certain amount of political will, we were able to come together and rise out of the crisis. And that was largely because of FDR's New Deal. So we see the importance of moments of crisis being met with sweeping sets of legislation. And the original New Deal was exactly that and led to the creation of dozens of administrations and programs that continue to actually form the backbone of our society today. And it is really important to note that the original New Deal left out a lot of people. And so as we face the crisis that we're currently in, we want to make sure to do a better job and to be more inclusive and not leave people behind. So we believe that the case has never been clearer for a Green New Deal, and we're going to get into the specifics of what that really is. But it is a similar encompassment of the values of the original New Deal, but has kind of a more specific focus on the climate crisis as well. And yeah, just to reiterate, we believe that the Green New Deal is the economic stimulus that we need to lift us out of the approaching recession.
And the Sunrise Movement is very much centered around the Green New Deal. So again, just sort of a broad definition, it's defined on the Sunrise Movement website as a 10-year plan to mobilize every aspect of American society to 100% clean and renewable energy by 2030, a guaranteed living wage job for anyone that needs one, and a just transition for both workers and frontline communities.
Yeah, perfect. So there is a little bit of confusion, I think, from what I've been able to see of what exactly is the Green New Deal. And when we talk about it, there's a lot of different things that we're kind of talking about at once, but the Green New Deal is a resolution that has been introduced to Congress. In the House, it was introduced by Representative AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and in the Senate, it was introduced by Senator Ed Markey. And so a resolution is not a piece of legislation, it's not a law, it's not binding. Resolutions are more passed to express approval on something. And so when we talk about the Green New Deal, we're talking about that resolution that has been introduced to Congress, but we're also talking about any piece of legislation that falls under the 3 pillars of the Green New Deal. And this can be at any level of government, does not have to be federal. And so the pillars of a Green New Deal are three things. The first one is to stop the climate crisis through a 10-year nationwide mobilization. The second one is to create millions of good jobs and ensure economic prosperity for all. And the third is to establish a second Bill of Rights and defend the dignity of all people.
So again, these are still really kind of broad goals, so we're just going to keep breaking it down. And just to talk about each of those three goals separately, starting with the first one, stop the climate crisis. Around the world, we know the science, we've known it for quite a while now. And in the United States, we have less than 10 years to move our society to a net zero emission state if we want to keep under 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. That's a really tight window of time, and already we're really behind. Doing this is going to require decarbonization at every level of society. That's going to include transportation, retrofitting buildings, restoring wetlands and wildlands, using restorative agriculture, and especially transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources. And the next one, creating millions of good paying jobs. Obviously, everything that I just talked about, all those transformations on every level of society are going to take a lot of work, which is a really, really good opportunity for the federal government to give millions of people dignified work and lift the country out of record unemployment and recession that we're experiencing right now. Of course, some of this job is, or like all of this work, and some of that is going to be hard. Transitioning away from fossil fuels is going to mean that a lot of people are going to lose those high-paying jobs and the healthcare that come with it. But that's why it's all the more important that the U.S. provides really high-paying jobs with union benefits and healthcare to give to those communities instead. And there's so many ways too that this is going to provide new jobs. For instance, even just taking care of people who are sick from climate change or their children and things like that. Those are all going to be really important components to creating these new jobs. And of course, providing all these good jobs is definitely coupled with making sure that the money that we're spending is going to communities instead of just perpetuating existing systems of racism and inequality. So it's really an investment in these communities instead of exploiting them.
Yeah, perfect. And then the third pillar is to ensure a second Bill of Rights, much like the one that FDR proposed a century ago. And this is kind of the idea that the Bill of Rights in our Constitution, while it encompasses a lot of very vital rights, we also believe that there are other basic human rights that need to be defended, such as the human right to housing, to education, and to healthcare. And so, as you can see from this slide, we lay out kind of what a second Bill of Rights would encompass. So we wanted to talk a little bit about what Sunrise has accomplished as its time as an organization. And we wanted to start by just talking about the Nancy Pelosi office sit-in that occurred in November of 2018. And this was really when Sunrise was kind of thrown into the national spotlight. I think over 150 youth sat in her office or came to the House building where her office was located and kind of demanded that politicians have a plan in terms of what are we going to do about the climate crisis. This is an emergency and we really need the politicians to act like it's the crisis that it is. They were demanding that Nancy Pelosi instate a certain House committee for the climate crisis, and also to raise awareness that politicians should be signing the No Fossil Fuel Money pledge.
Yeah, and I mean, that was the Nancy Pelosi sit-in was kind of a more high profile, very exciting event. But Sunrise is a grassroots movement and we do organizing at every level. So a lot of you here might have already seen us in action. Just in 2020, during the elections, Sunrise reached out to hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of Americans via phone calls and texts and postcards, just encouraging folks to go out and vote. And also Sunrise members have been present at every protest for Black lives that happened and are continuing to happen around the country. So Sunrise is kind of guided by 11 pillars or principles, and we're just going to quickly talk about them. They just give kind of a sense of, what we're about and how we operate. So first of all, we are a movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. Again, the Green New Deal is really centered in what Sunrise is advocating for. And we grow our power through talking to our communities. A lot of what Sunrise does is just encourages folks to talk about climate change, talk about the fears they have around them, how we can find solutions and things like that. And we want to talk to everybody in our communities, not just people with different political views and things like that, because everybody's affected by climate change and everybody has an opinion on it. And again, we are Americans from all walks of life. We don't discriminate by race or color or creed or anything, religion. Again, climate change affects everybody, and in order to stop it or mitigate it, we need to have a solution that works for everybody. We are nonviolent in word and deed, a lot like what Miriam said. We do sit-ins, we do protests, and we encourage folks to vote and things like that, following the tradition of Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil disobedience activists. We do not, engage in any violence or anything like that. And we tell our stories and we honor each other's stories. Another big part of how Sunrise likes to motivate folks is just to encourage them to think about their stories and their experience and share them with others. We think that talking with others is really the best way to motivate folks to get activated and do something about climate change. So just sharing our stories and our experiences has been really powerful.
Yeah. And we ask for help and we give what we can. It's important to acknowledge that organizing takes a lot of energy, especially since with a climate change organization, there's always going to be a fossil fuel company that has something up their sleeve and is doing something that we probably want to be paying attention to. So with that being said, we understand if you can give an hour one week and no time the next and 3 the next after that, we really just want you to give what you can to the movement. And we take initiative. Any group of 3 people can take action in the name of Sunrise. And this is really just to ensure that it's accessible for people to join. And we want as much help as we can get. Just like Zoe said, it's really important to just be talking about the climate crisis. And this kind of supports that. And we embrace experimentation and we learn together. There's no one right way to do things. There's no boss that's like ensuring we follow certain rules. We just want to make sure that we are moving forward together. And we take care of ourselves, each other, and our shared home. This probably goes without saying, but in order to be kind of a resilient, lasting movement, we want to be very compassionate, and that is especially important when we're working with the environment as well, because ultimately what's motivating us is love for our homes and our health. And we stand with other movements for change. Sunrise is a very intersectional movement, as we were talking about before. This is not just about the climate, this is about justice and jobs. And so we want to be supporting the people who are supporting other movements that we identify with. And finally, we shine bright. It can be kind of intense to always be reading about ways that our climate might not look the same in 10 years and ways things might be destroyed and stuff like that. But we do want to make sure we're bringing positivity and just supporting each other again. So now we kind of want to move from a national discussion of Sunrise to more the Northern New Mexico hub and talk a little bit about the specific environmental issues that we're facing in New Mexico. One of those is that there is oil in New Mexico. This is known as the Permian Basin and is in the south. So there is oil drilling going on there. We also have, this is an old headline, obviously, but it is known that Big Oil bought at least 11.5 million to influence New Mexico campaigns in this past election. So that's very important to pay attention to, just because when politicians accept money from the fossil fuel industry, they're most likely, there's an exchange going on there where they're going to be defending those fossil fuel industries in the legislation that they're passing. And there's also a coal economy in the Navajo Nation. This can be devastating for the indigenous communities there, and definitely needs to be paid attention to.
Yeah, and then it's also really important to note that these attacks on New Mexican land and New Mexican communities are continuing to happen. It's not like these oil companies just set up shop 100 years ago and they're still there. Just recently, the Trump administration has really been pushing to open up the Chaco cultural area, the greater Chaco area, to fracking. Kind of goes without saying, fracking is pretty destructive to the environment and can contaminate water sources. And that's devastating anywhere, but especially the greater Chaco area is very, very sacred to the Navajo Nation and other indigenous communities around the Four Corners area. So these attacks are just really continuing to happen, and they need to be paid attention to. And also, it's important to note that the Green New Deal, again, really centers the voices and the leadership of Indigenous communities and Black communities. And the Navajo Nation has actually put out a Red New Deal. It's sort of like an addition to the Green New Deal, and it kind of just builds on the Green New Deal to really center Indigenous priorities. And that's a really important component of it. So now that we've kind of talked about some of the issues that we face in New Mexico and what is really motivating us as a hub, we just wanted to talk a little bit about our hub and what we've been up to. So we started in the spring of 2020, so it's a pretty new hub. And because of that, we've mostly been occupied by club meetings, trying to recruit members, onboarding, and that kind of thing. We've also put on a number of trainings, one about the history and the future of law enforcement, a Green New Deal in New Mexico, what that would look like, and how local governments are structured, how young people can engage in their local government, and things like that. We've also engaged in some mutual aid campaigns. So many of you may have seen the supplies donations drive that we set up outside the Los Alamos Co-op. That happened this summer, and all of those donations ended up at the Navajo Nation. Again, the club is pretty small. So we've also focused a lot on supporting other organizations. We are very much not the first climate-centered youth organization in New Mexico. There are many that are already existing and active and really, really incredible. So we also want to support them in their efforts and have our memberships or, use our resources to help them out. Currently, the club is not very active. That's one disadvantage of organizing with young people, is that, we have to prioritize school and families and that kind of thing. So ever since September, we've sort of seen a decrease in membership and capacity for extra work. But that doesn't mean that we won't restart sometime soon or gain more membership.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so just it's good to be upfront about the status of our club and organizing in the age of COVID is also kind of challenging just because we've never had like an in-person group meeting. But that's not to say that if you're interested, there aren't ways to get involved. So it's really nice because we have the infrastructure very set up. So we have a Slack, which is basically a messaging platform for anybody who's interested, where we can post updates. And we also have connections and resources for other organizations as well. We also do want to touch on the fact that Sunrise National is very much active. The Georgia Senate races were something that they were organizing a lot for, and we are happy that they ended up in the way that they did. And we're now very excited about the possibility of climate action with the new administration coming in. So we do have, in a couple slides over that we'll get to, we do have a link to kind of like a Welcome to Sunrise National meeting that's taking place on the 12th, actually, if you're interested in going to that. And this is just, yeah, Zoe, do you want to take this slide?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just one last note before we kind of open it up to questions and discussion. We want to definitely acknowledge these other organizations that are already doing a lot of this climate work here in New Mexico. One of the most prominent ones of which is YUCCA, which stands for Youth United for Climate Change Action. They are based in Santa Fe. They really center Indigenous and people of color. And they've done a lot of really amazing climate work here in New Mexico. So we would definitely encourage all of you who are interested in that kind of work to check them out, donate any time or resources that you might be able to.
Yeah, perfect. So we just want to open it up to questions, anything's on the table, and thank you so much for listening to our presentation.
Great. So we've had a couple questions here on it come in, and I would just like to remind everyone that if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. The first question is, what is the best way for me to get involved with environmental activism right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So on, I think it's, yeah, so this slide right here, we can drop this link in the, I can't do it, but you can also get this link to the Sunrise National training on the Sunrise website. And that's not the only way to get involved though. There is a legislative session coming up in New Mexico. And so I think one of the best things to do is just to educate yourself on like climate change legislation that might be coming before the New Mexico legislature, and Yucca is doing a lot of stuff corresponding with that. So their website is also online. And yeah, I think there are a lot of like lit or listening recommendations that me and Zoe could give if there's interest in terms of educating yourself as to like the potential for climate change legislation under the Biden administration and climate action in your local community, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would definitely encourage getting involved with Sunrise National. Like Miriam said, the work is never really done. Even though the elections may be over, we still have a lot of work to do holding the incoming administration accountable to the promises that they've made during the campaign. So there are always going to be phone banks and that kind of work to do. And I would also encourage folks to get involved in local government. Los Alamos as a county has a lot of power to make some changes and also a lot of room for growth. I know just recently, I think they are planning on having a climate change task force. And so just holding even our local government accountable to being good stewards of the land and giving back to communities is a really, really powerful way to make change.
Mm-hmm. And just to add to that, Los Alamos local government, there's also a greenhouse gas commission that I think is looking for 9 members, and the like end date for submitting interest is January 18th if you are interested in participating in that.
Great. There's a couple questions that came in. follow-up questions to that. First of all, how old do you have to be to join the Sunrise Movement?
The Sunrise Movement is generally, it's focused on youth. So that's generally 35 and under. Miriam, correct me if I'm wrong. Is really where we're focusing on membership. Luckily, the Sunrise Movement actually also has some ways that people who are above that age category can still get involved. So I can find that link really quickly and drop it in the chat. Obviously, we accept help from everybody, but the Sunrise Movement specifically wants to empower the voices of folks who are going to be affected by climate change for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so there's not really a minimum age. You can be like literally as young as 3. There was a viral video of Sunrisers sitting in Dianne Feinstein's office in California, and there were some really young folks there. So yeah, we just definitely want to empower young voices to learn about this issue that is really central to our time.
Great. And there are also some questions about the training, specifically who teaches the trainings and are they free?
Yeah, the trainings are free, and that will be other trained Sunrise Movement members teaching them.
Yeah, so the trainings are really cool. They're usually put on by Sunrise Movement members themselves. So Miriam and I have put on trainings. I see Logan Lathrop is in this meeting. He's helped a lot out. He's helped out a lot with trainings as well. Again, the whole objective of Sunrise is really to empower youth voices. So encourage them to share their experience and their knowledge. That doesn't mean that we don't bring in the wisdom and expertise of other people who are really learned in those subjects. But it's really fun to put on and have trainings done by young people just because they are so passionate about those topics.
Great. I'm sorry.
I just saw a question in the chat. If you could ask everyone listening or watching the YouTube recording to do 3 things to help combat climate change, what would those 3 things be? I don't know, it's hard to like reduce it to one number. I guess I think that there are just so many ways. It kind of depends on like where your resources can best be allocated. I would definitely say, just to name off a couple, like keeping your eye out for petitions and signing those. Usually petitions always need like a minimum number of signatures to be able to brought to a government or legislators. So, signing petitions that you believe in, and also donating money to organizations that you really believe in. Miriam, do you have any to add?
Yeah, definitely. There was this TED Talk, I think her name was Catherine Hayhoe, but the title of the TED Talk was "The best thing you can do for climate change is to talk about it." So I would say whoever submitted that question, you're in the exact right place to educate yourself on the issue and then to talk about it, because what we need to combat the climate crisis is people power. And we've seen that Sunrise, for example, has had incredible influence, and a lot of that just comes from the sheer number of youth who have been activated through this organization. So just continue talking about it, continue reaching out to other people who might be interested in joining the Sunrise Movement. Keep your lawmakers accountable, as Zoe was mentioning. And there is kind of a debate between like more structural change and then like individual change. I'd say my personal favorite individual change to make is probably to reduce your meat intake, since that is really terrible in terms of the issue of deforestation and water consumption and land consumption. But that is definitely not something that's accessible for everybody, or how people want to take action, which is fine. So yeah, I'd say just keep talking about the climate crisis.
Yeah, just to add on to that, the pandemic has also really changed how we can mitigate climate change. Obviously, we can't really use reusable bags in grocery stores. It's much harder for folks to use public transportation, that kind of thing. So also, keep in mind that the pandemic is happening when you're wondering how you're going to make these changes. just because some of the things that were possible before the pandemic are just so much harder now.
Great. I guess switching gears, but kind of to over to government. Is there hope for meaningful climate legislation? And before you answer that, I would just like to mention that we are very privileged to have Representative Lujan on here today as a guest, and they'll be speaking at the end of today's talk more about climate legislation.
So sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't quite hear it there.
Yeah, sorry.
You're good.
Is there hope for meaningful climate legislation?
Yeah, I can take a stab and then pass it to you, Zoe. So that's a really good question, and I think it's hard to know right now, but we do have a lot of hope. And obviously Sunrise is an organization that wants to demand a lot from our lawmakers. People have probably been seeing in the media declarations that Joe Manchin is now one of the most influential senators, just because he is the most moderate Democrat. So people think that in order to pass certain things, we will need to kind of like ensure that we get his vote. So on a federal level, if we're thinking about like passing climate legislation through Congress, I guess that is kind of the question of like, will Joe Manchin vote for it? Will moderate Democrats vote for it? But luckily, West Virginia is West Virginia is one of the most poverty-stricken states in the union, and so they do have a lot to gain from sweeping climate legislation, and they have coal miners who are out of jobs. So hopefully Joe Manchin will see those things. And then less on the kind of legislative side and more on the executive side, there were like 84 really intense environmental rollbacks that the Trump administration enacted that Joe Biden can work to reverse. And he is also set to ensure that his cabinet members and his different departments and administrations are all kind of working with an eye on climate change. So I think that we are going to see a lot of improvement, and whether it's fast enough or not is still a question, but I am encouraged.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think that even if maybe we haven't seen the climate legislation that we'd like to see at this point, I think that there is hope that it's going to come. Just from looking at this past election, both on the national and on the state and local levels, candidates are talking way more about climate change. I think they're definitely catching up to the fact that climate change is kind of a top issue for their constituents. Sorry, I can never say that word. And they're going to start realizing, for better or for worse, that if they want to get reelected, they need to be doing something about climate change. So I think there definitely is hope. And also, kind of like Miriam said earlier in the presentation, we've seen that people power works. And as climate change gets worse and more people start to suffer from it and get activated to fight against that issue, we're going to see more and more protests, more and more petitions, and proposed legislation. And I'm really excited for all that to happen.
Great. Well, while we're on this subject, I'd like to take the moment to introduce Representative Tara Lujan. She is a member of the New Mexico House of Representatives and is from the 48th District. Representative, if you would like, the floor is yours now.
I'm trying to allow you to use your video if you would like to turn your video on.
Keep the video down because I'm having reception problems, so it's better if I talk. Sorry about that. I try. It's you won't be able to hear me if I have the video on too well. So yeah, I think what you're doing is wonderful. I've been on since the organization started and really got a strong movement going. I myself started as an environmental advocate in high school and became a vegetarian and did all those things that you're talking about. And I'm an adult, of course, now, and I have a teenage son and a 7-year-old little girl, and we're still, in battle with all these things that are going on for our environment and climate change. And really, it's been something that is that has motivated me to run for office and to fill this position here in New Mexico. And I just want to say, you're inspiring, and you got everything right. I've also worked on the federal level with our now new senator, our former Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, our new senator, but I've also worked with Senator Heinrich, Senator Udall, and now our new Congresswoman Teresa Ledger, and Deb Haaland is a personal close friend of mine too. And just that delegation that we have on the federal level is incredible. So you're really covering it. And now we have Biden in place, and we have the Senate and the House. So things are looking good as far as the hopeful vision that you have. And I just so want to encourage you more to stay involved the way you are. But on the local level here in New Mexico, I'm a representative in House District 48, and that's in Santa Fe County. But I'm from northern New Mexico by relations and family. And I'm glad you put this together, this chapter for Sunrise for Northern New Mexico, because I'm actually I've gotten outreach from students from La Cueva in Albuquerque High School, who have an environmental justice group, and they're asking about legislation and how they get involved. And my question to you is, could you get involved or help me get them involved in what you're doing, and maybe even do a presentation with them, because I'm thoroughly impressed with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We are always happy to chat with more youth, and yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And again, we could also, send you or them a list of organizations that are active in their area, if they're interested in that. But yeah, we're always happy to get in touch with more folks. Yeah.
Wonderful. And I just want to say, so thank you very much for doing it. So I was going to talk a little bit about the legislation that's being proposed here. So one thing I've signed on to is the Green Amendment. And I think you were talking about that earlier, what that means maybe on the federal level. But what it means for New Mexico is that we create an amendment in the Constitution for the state to protect our water, our land, and our air, and that we have a right to that. So that's something that if you need it, I'll send you some information on that. There are lots of pieces of legislation that are moving through that I think that have a very good chance. One thing that we have done, and I've been vocal about, is the Methane Rule. I don't know if you've kept track of that, but what's happening in our state and what's happened nationally is that gas and oil has come in, and they've left these methane wells that are contaminants, right? Methane gas and everything that comes up with that as well, including ozone and what. But they have not done their responsible thing and cleaned up those sites. And so the Methane Rule that we put in place through this state is to sure that they come in and that we put funding, and that they come in and that they clean up what the contamination that they've caused. And just I've been talking about that and really pushing that we have stronger recommendations in that rule. We just had a hearing this past week. So if you wanted to follow up with that, that's something very recent that needs to be taken care of, because the state we had nothing in place for that until recently. So I just want to bring that to your attention as something that I've been working on and advocating for. You've probably heard of I had my list and it disappeared as we've been talking. But what are the other? There's a lot of other legislation that's coming on. I'd like to send you a list of it, but we have an opportunity now for our youth to be involved and really understand. What I wanted to ask is if you wanted to, get on a piece of legislation. If you're looking at the legislation that we're proposing, there's a large list of it. Melanie Stansberry is doing a Climate Action Act that's going to be looking at how we are going to protect our water and everything that comes along with that. Things are kind of moving and changing right now, and the governor fully is supporting that piece of legislation. We have Senator Steinberg down in Las Cruces area who's supporting some legislation that would allow for accessibility to our native lands, our tribal lands, and to our nations, our tribal nations, for access to energy. So he's looking at that. That's another green bill that's out there. I'm calling them green bills. I don't know what you like to call them, but that's what I'm looking at. We have other tax type legislation, and we're looking at how we're going to look at industry and look at development and infrastructure, and how we're going to have a code to build in a green way, so to speak. So keep your eye on those things that are coming forward. I will get you a list of those things. I will be talking to our leadership office because they do have a good comprehensive list that I still need to look at. And as we're getting closer to session, we'll have a better list, and we'll see that people are actually moving these bills forward, or a lot of them are in draft right now, but some of them, like the green amendment, we've already pre-registered and submitted, so it's out there, and that's just a really good, that's a good start for us to finally say in our state that these are rights for us, that we have the right to clean air, and we have the right to protect our lands, and have consequences when those rights are violated. So there's a lot of other components that move along with that. I would, be happy to work with you. I'm trying not to take up too much time because I know you have limited time. So I wanted to let you know that, we have strong legislators that are working on climate change and our green economy. And I'm also I'll be sponsoring a bill for legalization of cannabis, and what that means in diverting our economy away from gas and oil. And it's a small piece to our economy, but it's a start, and it's things that this is what we need to start looking towards to see how we do diversify our economy. And I'm glad you brought up like who's taking funding from gas and oil and that sort of thing. I'm glad that you're paying attention to all those things. It sounds like you're very well educated in how legislation and how everything is moving along together, and you're keeping track of all those things. So I just want to commend you. You're doing an awesome job, and I'd love for other groups, youth groups and organizations to talk with you, or you talk with them and you present in front of them. I'm also working on legislation to bring after-school programs, funding to after-school programs, and that's in summer programs. And I just think that what you're doing, you could really create something from your movement so that our youth are more informed and better educated in our climate. And I just thank you for doing this and putting this together. You're incredible, and I can't say enough, but you're inspiring. Like I said, I started off when I was in high school and was protesting because of the our rainforest and the things that were going on, and the deforestation and what that meant for our climate and global warming and everything. And it's still going on, and the devastation is here, and it's you're our future, and you're the ones that have to really help. And we're leaving this on your foot, at the foot of your future, and it's not okay with me. So thank you for being this involved and this educated. We need you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here, and we will certainly get our contact information to you. And thanks again for the whole legislation preview. That was amazing.
Well, there's more to it. I'll send it to you. And Yucca's doing an awesome job. So I literally had my whole list of everything, and my computer just went loop except for Zoom. I don't know what's going on with it.
At least we had you.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about that, but I will get in touch with you because I really would love you to present, because honestly, our students are really, they don't know what to focus in on. They don't know how to have these conversations and what to discuss. And it would help them to have the mentorship from other youth like yourselves.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for being here. It's really cool to hear about how you started out as an environmental activist in high school. That's definitely kind of how me and Miriam were. And so it's cool to see that that's still really motivating you now. And yeah, we would love to get in touch, and thank you so much for being here.
You're awesome. Keep going. Oh, and that's it's community solar was at the tip of my tongue. I'm signing on to that bill too, and it's really important when that we have a good chance of moving forward this session. So stay in touch with it. I'm here for you. Please use me as a resource. If you have any questions or need any information or input or how we're going to stay involved, because it's going to be a virtual session. So stay in contact. Please, I'll leave my information in the chat.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for talking. So seeing as we're getting towards the end of our live stream, so Miriam, do you have any last closing thoughts you want to say, or anything you want to leave with the people here today?
Yeah, I guess just to kind of reiterate what I already said, this is the issue that is facing our generation, and it will continue to have to deal with it for our entire lives. So getting educated and showing interest now is really important. So much is dependent on this, and we just thank you for being here, and want to reemphasize that we are definitely open to personal contact. So let Krista know if you'd like our personal email and our personal phone number, and we would love to work together to further our climate goals.
Yeah, basically, I had the same thing. Just to everybody here, I think that showing interest in getting educated is already a really great first step. So we really appreciate you being here, and we would love to encourage you to maybe talk to your families or your friends about what you learned today, or any questions you might have. Please, we would love to hear them. Like Miriam said, you can contact PEEC for our personal information. And yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you both so much for being here and presenting. And a special thank you to Representative Lujan for speaking and giving us some more insight into the legislation going on in New Mexico. I'd also just like to thank everyone here for joining us tonight. If you would like to watch a recording of this event, it will be added to our YouTube channel within the next few weeks. And if you have any questions, Krista earlier put her email in the chat. I think she might put it in again, but feel free to email her directly. Any general questions you might have about the Sunrise Movement, PEEC, or really anything related. So yeah, thank you again for joining us.
All right, so we're going to close the talk. Everyone have a great evening.